you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Well, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We're really glad you're here. Right here on the, say it with me now, AFR Talk Network. You've locked it in. Big show tonight, and it will include some foreign policy discussion. Boring, not boring foreign policy discussion as academics going back and forth, but the realities of what Israel's facing. Before we get to all that, though, let's go to what John Kerry said today in regard to the evidence of the Syrian regime run by Bashar Assad and the use of chemical weapons. Roll it.
Sarin was used. Sarin killed. The world can decide whether it was used by the regime which has used chemical weapons before, the regime which had the rockets and the weapons, or whether the opposition secretly went unnoticed into territory they don't control to fire rockets they don't have, containing sarin that they don't possess, to kill their own people, and that without even being noticed, they just dissembled it all and packed up and got out of the center of Damascus, controlled by Assad. Please.
It's got to be tough because when you have a history of siding with an organization against your own country or doubting the evidence of the executive when you went with the evidence of the executive. I'm speaking of the Iraq War, of course, and the intelligence and the statements made. And now you're looking and pointing out the absurdity of what you have to prove. And you have a partner like Vladimir Putin, not the most honest guy in the world and certainly not a great record of human rights or being candid with the world community. Bottom line, I appreciate what he's saying now. I wish I saw more consistency because that would make us Americans first as opposed to Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, or liberals. We'll talk a little more about that with our good friend, Pastor Aaron Free. I was about to say Reverend Aaron Free, Pastor Aaron Free. And we will also be discussing Israel's security with Pastor Aaron Free in his book, 2-Minute Warning. But right now I want to go to our good friend, Jerry Bowyer. He is the chairman of Bowyer Research and a Forbes contributor. He is a regular guest on Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, and he's back. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine, Crane. How are you?
I'm doing well. Why don't we jump right in with Gentle Ben Bernanke, who makes a statement that, hey, he's going to start tapering, which means that they're going to pull back from their bond buying program of mortgage-backed securities, and meaning that, in essence, we're going to see interest rates rise and attempt to return to a place where we have interest rates that are more market-driven as opposed to arbitrarily driven by the Fed.
Right.
And that would tell us that we're finally through this recession. I know it's technically over, but bottom line, we're recovering enough. Things are stable enough where we don't have to put the pain reliever and inject it. Your thoughts yesterday of what he said?
It's really kind of amazing. Let's just put things in context here. The only thing under discussion was whether to decrease the new money being added to the system through a completely unprecedented program called quantitative easing. So off the table was, the Fed already has the lowest interest rates we've ever had in American history. Basically, they've set the interest rate that they traditionally set is already set at zero. It's never been like that before ever in American history. So that's already an extremely aggressive creation of money. In addition to that, the Federal Reserve went out and started to buy very large quantities of federal Treasury bonds. That is, the pieces of paper basically that the central government uses to borrow money. That's QE1 and QE2. In addition to that, they launched a buying of other securities, namely private securities like mortgage bonds, which has never, ever been done by the United States in the whole history of the Republic. So that's the level of interference in markets that we're at. There was a rumor that instead of buying $85 billion a month in these securities with newly created money, they might taper back to $75 billion a month. And even that turned out not to be true. It is full speed ahead. We are creating money at a pace like we have never created money before. We're creating money in ways that we have never created money before. We're interfering in market processes in ways that are completely unprecedented in American history. Really, even in most of the countries of the world, have not intervened this forcefully in distorting their interest rates. And what we saw from Dr. Bernanke is absolutely zero tolerance for pain, and we saw that he's unwilling to impose even the most minute amount of monetary discipline. You know, Crane, someone asked me recently, this was on a conference call, it was an investment committee, and they said, you know, what should Bernanke do and who should replace Bernanke and all the rest of it. And I said, you know, the most important thing that you need in a Fed chairman is not technical knowledge. You may assume a certain amount of technical knowledge. The most important thing you need in a Fed chairman is moral courage. What you need in that job is somebody who is willing to be hated. Paul Volcker was willing to be hated, and Ronald Reagan was too, as a matter of fact. And they were willing to go through a painful adjustment process to put the United States back on a growth path rather than an inflation path, rather than fake growth through monetary policy. We have the un-Reagan in the presidency and the un-Volcker in the Fed. Neither of them. In the one case, Obama has courage. He's willing to go ahead with his plans, no matter how foolish and foolhardy and ineffective they are, because his ideology drives him to do that. On the other hand, with Bernanke, a man who knows better, he simply does not have the moral fiber to do things which people will hate him for. And therefore, the crisis goes on. You're right. It's not a recession anymore, but it's not normal either. The recession is over, but the crisis continues.
This may sound like a silly and stupid question, but is there a Fed policy that could be crafted, one that you spoke to with Paul Volcker and obviously through the appointment of he stuck with him, I guess, didn't he, from Carter, Reagan.
Yeah.
But bottom line, can you have a biblical Fed policy, and if so, what would it be?
Well, that's an interesting point of view. I think you can make a pretty good case that a biblical monetary policy would be based on metals. Now, it's kind of complicated to go through that, but you do have a lot of positive references in the Scripture to precious metals-backed currency, not just in Israel's history, but even before that. I'm not going to go out there and say that if you're a Christian, you must believe in a gold standard or a silver standard. That would be further, I think, than the biblical evidence goes. But I think one thing that a serious Christian has to reject is the idea that debasing currency is, by some kind of planning elite that are allegedly sort of above the rest of us, above the normal human limitations of selfishness and abuse of power. I think we have to reject that notion. But I would go further to say that there has to be some form of monetary discipline. The Bible, actually, it's interesting. The readings, if someone goes to a Catholic church or Orthodox or Lutheran, they'll see the Revised Common Lectionary. The readings for the past couple of weeks have been through the prophet Amos. And one of the strongest condemnations Amos makes is about the debasing of currency. And he says what it does is it makes poor people poor and they get sold into slavery. You know, a lot of preachers are preaching from Amos and talking about how Amos is condemning social injustice, and they're right, he is, but specifically the social injustice is the debasing of currency. What happens is corrupt kings in the time of Amos were debasing the currency, and you didn't have a full shekel, you had a debased shekel, essentially that's what we have now. We have a debased dollar. The persecuting emperors of Rome, Diocletian, Nero, they persecuted the church and they debased the currency. And I would suggest that those things are related in that once you think you're a god, you think you can do whatever you want with somebody else's property or life. If you acknowledge that there is only one God-man ever, and it's not Nero, and it's not Diocletian, and it's not Jeroboam, and it's not Obama, there's only one God-man, only one Theanthropos, that's Jesus Christ. All the rest of us are human and subject to limitations, and we really shouldn't be in the business of taking people's money, whether it's debasement or direct confiscation. At that point, you have to have some kind of break on the money supply. For all of human history, that break has been gold or silver. Maybe someone can find another way to break away from pure paper currency and fiat and arbitrary power, but I'd say for now, I would personally favor some kind of metals-backed currency standard. And even if you don't believe the Bible requires it, the Constitution does. And we're supposed to obey the higher authority. And in our country, the higher authority is the United States Constitution. And it explicitly requires a metals-backed currency, not a fiat currency, not infinitely expandable at the whim of an executive or at the technological expertise of someone from the Ivy League schools.
And for the record, just so the audience knows this, that question, we didn't prepare for that. Actually, it was a question I've added impromptu. And quite frankly, it just shows the brilliance of one Jerry Bowyer. You are amazing. Sitting back and just listening to that, and in your answer, you said recognizing, in essence, the fallen nature, and recognizing
you got to start
power.
with the fallen nature of man,
right.
And you have to therefore limit the power of men over others.
So why is it? Okay, no, pardon me. My question is, why is it? If we understand that, our founders understood that, we have a Judeo-Christian foundation. A religious society to uphold the Constitution is necessary, as you well know. But bottom line, why is it when I ask a question if a conservative could win today, and what I mean by conservative is social conservative, economic conservative, could they win the presidency? So many feel, no, it's not possible. Have we all turned to government in the sense of the majority of Americans, and the government or the big government folks have won the debate or discussion to say, hey, guess what? Government can be your daddy, your God.
They haven't won the debate, but they have won the discussion. They haven't made a debate. They've simply used manipulative language. They've played with our stock response. They've flooded us with propaganda through popular culture. They didn't win our minds. They won our hearts, or actually even they won our guts. They won our passions and our impulses. They didn't win the debate. So the question was, can a conservative win now? And that's been your poll question, right? Could a genuine Christian conservative win the presidency right now? And a lot of your poll answers are saying no. Is that right?
Right. I asked the general question, finish this sentence, a Christian could win, or a conservative could win blank, if blank, and people filled it in. And I mean, everything from Hades freezing over to a whole host of things that were said. And wonderful responses, quite frankly, but it does show that people are let down. If all Christians would vote on their values instead of Democrats or on race, people chiming in, looking at the divisive elements of why people are voting. Your thoughts, Jerry?
Yeah, race or age or class. If the church were unified, if black Christians and white Christians thought the same way, and old and middle-aged and young Christians thought the same way, then this country would have consensus. But what happens is we allow sort of the holy trinity or the unholy trinity of leftist politics, race, gender, class, and let's add a fourth, so it's not a trinity anymore, age. We allow those wedges to get in, and so the Christian consensus is broken apart by those kind of cleavage points. So I think your answers are right in the sense that if you look at the country the way it is now, a good leader could not be elected. But I think maybe what they might be missing is a point that my friend George Gilder makes. A good leader creates his own consensus.
Yes.
A good leader doesn't just deal with the nation that he or she is faced with. A good leader comes out and persuades and changes the country. A really great leader comes out and looks at the country as it is and changes it into a country which will then accept good leadership. Reagan did that. We've seen that in history before. Constantine. There have been plenty of times that great nations were at the edge of the abyss, and God raises up a Wilberforce or a Reagan or a Constantine, and people might question any particular case, or a Luther or whatever. He raises people up, and those leaders lead so the country changes enough that will accept their leadership. So in my opinion, we're not doomed.
Jerry Bowyer, thank you. Great to be with you as always. I'm going to post the link to all of your articles as well as your latest article from Forbes. Thank you so much. Great to be with you. AFR Talk.